Every generation swears their cartoons were safe until you dig a little deeper. The 1,970 seconds looked colorful on Saturday mornings, but behind the catchy theme songs were shows that made parents furious, teachers worried, and stations pull episodes off the air. Which cartoon caused children to copy dangerous stunts? Which one was accused of being too real for young minds? Let's rewind and uncover 15 animated series that rattled nerves and sparked bans. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, 1,972, 1,985. It's hard to overstate how different Fat Albert felt when it first aired. At a time when cartoons usually meant pratfalls and silly gags, here came a show that wanted to talk about real life. Kids weren't chasing treasure maps or battling monsters. They were navigating poverty, bullying, disabilities, and family struggles. That honesty made it groundbreaking and deeply controversial. Parents tuned in expecting a gentle laugh, only to find an episode about kids being wrongly accused of shoplifting and lectured by an officer. The phones at local stations lit up with complaints. Some called it traumatizing, others said it was unfit for children's viewing hours. Schools debated whether it was valuable teaching or just too heavy for young audiences. One California school district even voted to ban it from classroom use. Episodes that touched on drug temptation or gang life were even more explosive. Some stations flat out refused to air them, and Southern broadcasters often cherry-picked only the safe stories. Meanwhile, critics couldn't agree. Educators praised its honesty. Parents' groups called it reckless. What's undeniable is that Fat Albert treated children as capable of handling real topics, and that scared people. By not sugarcoating the world, the show earned both praise and outrage. Looking back, its willingness to represent inner-city life and complex characters turned it into a cultural landmark. In the 70 seconds, though, it was labeled too bold, too raw, and in some living rooms, banned outright. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? 1,969, 1,978. You'd think Scooby and the gang were the least offensive thing on television. Talking dog, goofy chases, unmasking villains, what could possibly spark outrage? A lot, apparently. To certain parents' groups, Scooby-Doo wasn't harmless fun. It was occult imagery, too much fright, and, in some cases, teaching kids to trespass. In the early 70 seconds before the big cultural panic about fantasy themes, Scooby was already on the chopping block. Ghosts, witches, and haunted houses weren't just entertainment, they were seen as encouraging belief in the supernatural. Boycotts formed. Church-led groups demanded the series be pulled. Some U.S. affiliates considered cutting it from their Saturday lineup entirely. Even the slapstick antics didn't escape criticism. Bonks on the head, trapdoors, near drownings, watchdog groups argued it normalized danger. In the UK, certain chase sequences were trimmed down for fear of giving children nightmares. And of course, Shaggy's constant appetite raised eyebrows. Was it just comic timing, or was there some hidden message? Rumors flew, and some PTAs demanded Shaggy be removed altogether. Despite the noise, Scooby survived. Networks softened the edges here and there, tacked on friendly morals at the end of episodes, and occasionally adjusted the tone. But controversy didn't hurt it. It cemented Scooby-Doo as an icon. Every protest only made kids more curious. And so, while watchdogs wrung their hands, the mystery machine rolled on. Scooby wasn't just solving mysteries. He was outlasting every attempt to censor him. Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, 1,972, 1,974. Before primetime animation was dominated by sarcastic families like The Simpsons or The Griffins, there was Harry Boyle. He was the star dad of Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, a show that hit television with barbed satire instead of slapstick. The problem? It aired right after the evening news, meaning the entire family saw its jokes about politics, protests, and suburban paranoia. Conservatives loathed it. They said it mocked the military, promoted disrespect for authority, and undermined traditional family values. Letters poured in calling it un-American and dangerous. Some local affiliates refused to air episodes that dealt too directly with protests or women's rights. Meanwhile, progressive critics weren't happy either. They accused the show of downplaying genuine movements or poking fun at causes like civil rights. One infamous storyline had Harry joining a neighborhood watch that spiraled into a paranoid militia. It was intended as satire, but for some, it cut far too close to reality. Broadcasters worried it was sparking unrest instead of laughs. Producers tried editing dialogue, cutting entire episodes, and even softening Harry's more biting lines. But the damage was done. The show lasted just 2 years before being buried by its own boldness. Today, it's remembered as one of the first animated series to prove that cartoons could be political commentary. Back then, it was attacked from both sides. In the 70 seconds, Wait Till Your Father Gets Home wasn't just entertainment, it was a culture war in cartoon form. The Jackson 5 1000, 971 1973. Imagine putting the world's biggest pop stars into a cartoon. On paper, it was a perfect Saturday morning plan. The Jackson brothers sang, danced, solved mysteries, and spread good vibes. But almost immediately, the show became a lightning rod. The first controversy came from its reliance on superstition and mystical plots. Fortune tellers, voodoo curses, and talking animals weren't just playful tropes. They were labeled dangerous by parents' groups. In some U.S. states, entire episodes were yanked off the air. Broadcasters in the Caribbean and Africa also cut segments, citing cultural insensitivity. Criticism didn't end there. Within black communities, opinions were split. Some hailed it as long overdue positive representation of black heroes. Others said it trivialized real struggles, turning the Jacksons into caricatures instead of showing the pressures of fame and systemic challenges. Music insiders weren't pleased either. Episodes often poked fun at shady managers or recording industry greed. Agents and executives weren't amused, and some even threatened lawsuits over thinly veiled depictions. To top it off, the Jackson family themselves reportedly had issues with how their lives were portrayed. Despite all the controversy, the show built a loyal following and became a cult favorite. Kids loved the music and the animated style, but adults worried it was selling more fantasy than reality. What was intended as a cheerful pop culture vehicle wound up banned, edited, and endlessly debated. In the 70 seconds, even a cartoon about the Jackson 5 was enough to spark serious outrage. Star Trek, the animated series, 1973, 1974. If you thought Saturday morning Star Trek was just going to be aliens and space lasers, you'd be mistaken. The animated continuation of the beloved sci-fi series was as philosophical as ever, and that's exactly what got it into trouble. This wasn't just goofy space adventures. Episodes tackled prejudice, war, and even existential questions. In one story, an alien species was split literally by skin color. Half black, half white. A metaphor that hit harder than some parents wanted their kids to process. Another episode introduced a devil-like being and explored magic as reality. Cue Outrage. In the American South, some stations refused to air it. In the UK and Germany, episodes were cut completely. Even in markets where it did air, broadcasters debated time slots and demanded disclaimers. Critics argued that children shouldn't be asked to wrestle with questions about genocide, war, or morality before lunchtime. Fans, of course, loved it. The show preserved the spirit of Star Trek, taking on the same bold ideas as the original live-action series. But instead of primetime adults, the audience now included kids, and that was enough to make watchdogs panic. Star Trek, the animated series, never fully escaped that tension. It was praised for daring to be smart, yet censored for being too complex. Looking back, it's easy to see why it holds cult status. But in the 1970 seconds, this wasn't just a cartoon. It was an intellectual powder keg, one many broadcasters simply refused to touch. The Adventures of Muhammad Ali, 1977. Most celebrity cartoons were harmless fluff. Not this one. The Adventures of Muhammad Ali dropped the boxing legend straight into animated adventures, and it carried his fiery, real-life persona with it. Within weeks, controversy hit like a punch. Episodes didn't shy away from issues Ali faced outside the ring. He spoke against prejudice, encouraged kids to think for themselves, and even questioned authority figures. For a Saturday morning lineup, that was like setting off an alarm. Parents wanted silly jokes, not civic debates. Some broadcasters, especially in conservative states, were livid. They claimed the show pushed un-American values. Veterans groups sent angry letters, accusing it of disrespect. A handful of TV stations quietly shifted it to late-night slots or cut it altogether, saying it was too political for children. Even advertisers grew nervous. Some sponsors threatened to pull out, worried that associating with Ali's outspoken image would spark backlash. Behind the scenes, network executives pressured the producers to water down the stories, tone down the speeches, and make Ali more of a cheerful superhero than a truth-teller. But if you know anything about Muhammad Ali, it's that he never pulled punches. Even in cartoon form, he was portrayed as brave, outspoken, and unwilling to fit into a safe Saturday morning box. The result? Ratings plummeted under the weight of controversy, and the show lasted only 13 episodes. Yet, its short run proved something important. Animation didn't need to stay silent about the real world. And sometimes, one man's honesty, animated or not, was enough to rattle the entire television system. Schoolhouse Rock, 1973, 1984, Conjunction Junction, What's Your Function? It's hard to imagine that catchy tune causing outrage, but in the 1,970 seconds, Schoolhouse Rock stirred plenty of it. On the surface, it was innocent, little animated shorts teaching grammar, math, and civics. But critics argued that those 3-minute lessons were quietly changing how kids thought about the world. Parents complained that cartoons were supposed to entertain, not educate. Teachers were divided too. Some praised the series for making learning fun. Others worried that it oversimplified serious topics, giving children just enough knowledge to be disruptive. Political arguments soon followed. Progressives said the show didn't go far enough, that it glossed over real history. Conservatives accused it of indoctrinating kids with dangerous knowledge. Even something as simple as the iconic episode, I'm Just a Bill, sparked debate. Was it empowering children to understand government or encouraging them to challenge authority? Several schools and TV affiliates banned or restricted the shorts, claiming education belonged in classrooms, not in between slapstick cartoons. But like many banned works, the criticism only made it more popular. Kids loved the catchy songs and remembered the lessons long after. Decades later, Schoolhouse Rock is celebrated as a classic. In its own time, though, it was accused of being either too educational or too political. And that strange mix of praise and fear made it one of the most hotly debated cartoons of the 70 seconds. Godzilla 1978, 1979. Bringing the King of Monsters to Saturday mornings sounded brilliant, until parents realized what that meant. Hanna-Barbera's Godzilla cartoon introduced a Temptation-esque cartoon, towering green giants stomping through cities, breathing fire, and battling giant foes, while a research crew cheered him on. To kids, it was epic. To watchdogs, it was terrifying. Complaints poured in that the roars, collapsing buildings, and fiery blasts were too intense for young viewers. Parents reported nightmares, teachers worried about aggression, and psychologists warned that the show encouraged destructive play. In the UK and Australia, regulators stepped in, slashing or banning episodes that featured heavy destruction. Stations tried to soften the blow by introducing Godzuki, a smaller comic sidekick meant to lighten the tone, but the backlash didn't stop. Environmental activists even chimed in, arguing the cartoon watered down Godzilla's original symbolism as a warning about disasters, turning him into a cuddly superhero instead. Networks shuffled its time slots, trying to aim it at slightly older kids. But its reputation as too scary for mornings stuck. Ironically, that only made kids more desperate to see it. Though it only ran briefly, The Godzilla cartoon proved that when you bring a city-smashing monster into a child's world, outrage is guaranteed. And the bans and edits only made it cooler in playground conversations. Devlin, 1974, 1976. Inspired by daredevil stunt riders of the 70 seconds, Devlin centered on Ernie Devlin, a motorcycle stunt performer traveling with a circus. It was supposed to capture the excitement of risky jumps and flashy tricks. Instead, it sparked a wave of real-world injuries. Not long after it debuted, hospitals began reporting a spike in children attempting to copy Devlin's stunts. Kids built makeshift ramps in backyards, rode bikes off porches, and tried living room obstacle courses. News outlets picked up the story, and soon copycat injuries became the buzzword of the season. Parents' groups launched campaigns against the show, accusing it of glorifying reckless danger. The network scrambled to add disclaimers, with Devlin himself warning viewers at the end of episodes not to try the stunts. But critics argued the damage was done. The visuals were too enticing for kids to ignore. Some affiliates pulled the cartoon completely, branding it too hazardous for young audiences. Hanna-Barbera was forced to tone down the stunts, pivoting to safer, family-friendly plots. But the stigma stuck, and the series lasted just a short run before being shelved. Looking back, Devlin was undone by its own cool factor. It wanted to bottle the thrill of daredevil culture, but instead landed in the middle of a safety panic. In the 70 seconds, that was enough to make it one of the most controversial cartoons of the decade. Sealab 2, 02019721 1973. At first glance, Sealab 2020 seemed like wholesome sci-fi, an underwater research team solving problems beneath the ocean. But instead of goofy fish sidekicks and treasure hunts, it delivered environmental disaster after environmental disaster. Oil spills, reactor meltdowns, sabotage, and threats of extinction weren't fantasy, they were pulled straight from headlines. Parents expecting lighthearted fun were stunned. Kids watched as characters faced real dangers, difficult moral choices, and sometimes no easy victories. The tone was dark, serious, and for many, overwhelming. Letters of complaint poured in, accusing the show of frightening children and spreading anxiety. Broadcasters panicked. Some affiliates pushed it out of morning slots, burying it in less watched time frames. Internationally, the cuts were even harsher. In the UK and Australia, regulators demanded edits to tone down disaster scenes. In Germany and New Zealand, an episode about a nuclear meltdown was pulled entirely. Educators and activists were split. Some applauded its honesty, saying kids deserved to know about environmental dangers. Others said it was too much reality for young minds. The series didn't last long, but it left a legacy. Sealab 2020 proved cartoons could deliver sobering warnings, not just laughs. In the 1970 seconds, though, its grim approach was a deal-breaker. Parents wanted escape, not eco-anxiety. And so this bold cartoon was censored, cut, and largely forgotten until cult fans resurrected it years later as a symbol of what happens when Saturday mornings get too real. Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, 1976, 1980. Tarzan had been a pulp hero for decades, but when Filmation brought him to Saturday mornings, it wasn't the jungle vines that got people worked up. It was the presentation. The cartoon leaned into action-packed sequences, battles with wild animals, and a hero who spent most of his time in very minimal clothing. For some viewers, that alone was enough to raise eyebrows. Complaints rolled in about the exposed look of characters, particularly Tarzan and the jungle inhabitants, parents in the U.S. And UK wrote to broadcasters, accusing the show of being inappropriate for children. Conservative groups also accused the series of promoting savage stereotypes, pointing to how native characters were sometimes drawn. Internationally, the show faced even tougher scrutiny. Some African broadcasters criticized it for cultural insensitivity, editing or banning episodes where Tarzan saved local tribes. In Australia, action-heavy episodes were pulled due to fears they encouraged aggression. Despite the backlash, Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, was popular among young fans. Its pulpy adventure tone, strong environmental themes, and serialized storytelling made it one of the most unique Saturday morning shows of its era. But in the 1,970 seconds, when parents expected safer, softer cartoons, it was quickly branded as too wild. The controversy didn't kill it, but it did shadow the series. By trying to revive an old jungle hero for a new generation, the producers stumbled straight into debates about decency, stereotypes, and the line between action and aggression. Baggy Pants and the Nitwits, 1,977. Hanna-Barbera tried to mix old vaudeville comedy with a modern Saturday morning spin, but Baggy Pants and the Nitwits hit a nerve for all the wrong reasons. On paper, it was harmless slapstick. Baggy Pants was a silent clown in the Charlie Chaplin style, while the Nitwits were bumbling superheroes. But complaints started rolling in after its debut. Critics said the humor relied too heavily on stereotypes and clumsy caricatures. Certain gags, intended as harmless slapstick, were called out for mocking groups of people. Community leaders blasted it for reinforcing outdated images rather than moving children's entertainment forward. Violence was another sticking point. While slapstick had long been a staple of cartoons, watchdog groups in the 70 seconds were newly sensitive about encouraging unsafe behavior. The pratfalls, crashes, and bungled rescues were suddenly seen as setting a bad example. Some local stations responded by dropping the show from their lineup altogether. Even kids seemed divided. Some enjoyed the silliness, others found it repetitive. With adult outrage mounting and ratings sagging, the show was quietly canceled after just one season. Looking back, Baggy Pants and the Nitwits feels like a relic of a shifting era, caught between the anything-goes slapstick of earlier cartoons and the more politically conscious storytelling emerging in the late 70 seconds. Its downfall showed how quickly audience expectations were changing. Super Friends, 1,973, 1,985. You'd think Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman teaming up would be the safest bet in Saturday morning history. Instead, Super Friends spent its early years battling critics almost as much as villains. From the start, watchdog groups raised concerns about the show's action scenes. Even though fights were bloodless and villains often got away unscathed, critics argued it still glamorized violence. Some episodes with darker villains, mad scientists, haunted castles, or sinister plots were pulled from reruns in certain regions. Then came the accusations of hidden messages. Because the show occasionally introduced global threats, environmental disasters, or political villains, some parents claimed it was secretly teaching politics. Letters poured in, warning that children were being nudged toward activism instead of just being entertained. The backlash wasn't just American. In the UK, edits removed the most intense peril scenes. In Canada, local affiliates cut entire episodes that featured occult-like villain powers. Even the inclusion of characters from diverse backgrounds sparked mixed reactions. Some applauded the representation, while others criticized it as tokenistic. Despite all this, Super Friends endured. It adapted, changed its lineup, softened storylines, and added more educational moments. Ironically, the Outrage only solidified its status as a cultural touchstone. For a whole generation, it was their first introduction to superheroes. And maybe that's why it made adults nervous. It gave kids more than capes and catchphrases. It gave them heroes who talked about real issues. The New Adventures of Batman, 1,977, Batman in animation had already been popular thanks to earlier series, but the 1,977 revival pushed things in a darker direction, and that's where the trouble started. Unlike lighter superhero cartoons of the time, the New Adventures of Batman leaned into Gotham's eerie atmosphere, complete with sinister villains and moody backdrops. British and Australian censors thought it was too frightening for children. Episodes featuring twisted schemes or intense villain confrontations were either heavily edited or shelved entirely. Parents in the U.S. also complained that the tone was too grim for Saturday morning. The villains themselves sparked further controversy. Clayface's transformations and Joker's chaotic energy were cited as too disturbing, while episodes involving mind control or dark plots fueled parental paranoia. In some local markets, the show was shifted to later time slots or dropped altogether. Producers tried to lighten the mood by including Bat-Mite, a goofy sidekick meant to add comic relief. But that character's silliness clashed with the darker tone, frustrating fans and critics alike. It was a no-win situation, too dark for parents, too goofy for die-hard Batman lovers. The series ran only briefly, but its reputation as too intense for kids made it part of 70 Seconds Animation's ongoing censorship battles. In hindsight, it paved the way for more mature Batman stories down the line, but in its own decade, it was branded a misfit, caught between comedy and darkness, and banned in more than a few places. Return to the Planet of the Apes, 1975, 1976. Spinning off from the wildly popular live-action franchise, Return to the Planet of the Apes aimed to bring dystopian sci-fi to the Saturday morning crowd. But instead of fun space adventures, kids were met with political allegories, oppressive regimes, and, surprisingly, grim themes. The show depicted a world where humans were subjugated by intelligent apes, mirroring real-world struggles in a way that adults quickly noticed. Teachers and parents accused it of being too frightening, too bleak, and too political for children. Several U.S. school systems banned classroom screenings of episodes, while certain stations refused to air it during kid-friendly hours. In the UK, edits softened the sharpest dystopian elements, and in Canada, reruns were trimmed for violence. Despite the controversy, the animation itself was praised for its striking art style and atmospheric storytelling. But the backlash was relentless. Parents worried that the show introduced children to concepts of oppression, rebellion, and social injustice before they were ready. As a result, Return to the Planet of the Apes lasted only one season. Still, its short run left an impact. It proved that cartoons could carry the same weight as science fiction films, and that weight could be too heavy for the Saturday morning crowd. So there you have it, 15 cartoons from the 1970 seconds that stirred outrage, sparked bans, and proved that even Saturday mornings weren't safe from controversy. What looks like colorful fun today was once treated like cultural dynamite. Which of these would you have watched just to say you survived the uproar? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and share this with a friend who thinks old cartoons were all harmless fluff.